We have therefore made the assessment that COVID-19 can be characterized as a pandemic.
Traders here have been telling me that they want to see more details, more clarity about a fiscal stimulus plan.
First reaction and thought when you learn that the season's been suspended. This is crazy. This can't be true. It's like out of a movie.
Will be below 23,641. That means the Dow enters a bear market.
We will be suspending all travel from Europe to the United States for the next 30 days.
Disruptions to daily life are coming. Obviously, this show is focused on the markets, but I think those stories are what's going to really be impacting everybody in the weeks ahead.
All right, 1 year ago, March 11th, 2020, the day the world really fully realized what the COVID-19 pandemic might bring. And of course, many surprises and tragedies have followed since then. Welcome to Yahoo Finance Live on this Thursday morning, March 11th, 2021. I'm Miles Upton, joined as always by Julie Hyman and Brian Sazi. Let's take a look very quickly at futures this morning. We see markets are higher. NASDAQ futures opening or pointing to an open up some 1.6%. But let's go back in time quickly in some market history. Look at where the markets closed on that March 11th, the Wednesday, 2020. Again, the NBA really catalyzing, I think, for many folks, sort of the world was changing. There would not be these kinds of distractions that we had all focused so much on in the run-up to that official declaration of a pandemic. We see the performance here from the major averages. Those closes on that March 11th last year. 2741 on the S&P 500, 23,550 on the Dow, 7952 on the NASDAQ. Yesterday's close across those major averages, 3229 record close for the Dow, 3898 for the S&P, 13,068 for the NASDAQ. Again, we see the percentages here. The numbers are big. And I think the story that the market has told us over the last several years has perhaps been among the clearest of sort of where things are headed, where we certainly hope things are headed. And, guys, coming into the show, we talked about it last week that they were going to have a shutdown special here on Yahoo Finance. And my first thought was, I don't really want to relive that. I don't really want to think about it in those terms. It's, a thing the media does, though. We mark time through the calendar, and every day is a day. We started that. It's a joke now, but the AP started the every day has a moniker. And so March 11th is now going to be known as the day COVID got real. And I think back to the clips we're showing. We're sitting in the studio a couple feet away from guests, watching some clips last night of, the way the sports world handled it. They're all sitting in studios covering this, like it's normal. There's talk shows the day after where everyone is sitting around a close table. And, Julie, I think it's kind of strange to look back at the events of 1 year ago to realize that was barely the beginning, really, of how the pandemic eventually played out. And the word that comes to mind for me is naive. How little I knew, we all knew, everyone knew, not only about COVID itself, but about how things were going to change. I think probably still underrated if we kind of take it that way.
I share your disdain for every day is a day, but it's not just the media that sort of looks back on these big events, right? It's human nature for us to look back and say, what were we doing when? Take stock of what has happened in the year since. You and I were talking about concerts that we went to around that day. My husband just shared with me that he went with my son's class to go to the Edge, which was the viewing platform at the newly opened observatory at Hudson Yards on that day with their class, a bunch of kids all together. And in the following days, remember, to your point, people were still together, congregated. New York City schools did not shut down until the following week after March 11th and after it was declared a pandemic. We didn't start wearing masks until then after that. So this really was a process that we were all naive. There were very, very few voices who were not. And even if they were predicting that it was going to be worse than many of us knew, I don't think many would have predicted the longevity of this crisis, in part because how it was handled in various governments around the world, including our own. So, it's useful to look back and see where we were. And hopefully, at the end of the day, if we ever have to face this again, which experts say it's not unlikely, that we'll face it with our eyes, hopefully, a little more open than they were the last time around.
Yeah, speaking of naive, just a couple days before this, I just gotten back from a trip to Wendy's headquarters in Ohio. And we were walking the halls of the headquarters, myself and Wendy's CEO Todd Penegor, and he had done an interview on a smaller competing network. And he said, Brian, I'm surprised they asked me about China, where we really don't even do any business in China. Why are they asking me that question? I'm like, Todd, listen, man, I don't know. It's unclear why they asked you that. And in hindsight, look what has happened. The COVID certainly spread from China into the U.S. and the restaurant industry, for the most part, has been absolutely obliterated here. But, there are some key learnings here that I just jotted down as I reflected on the past year. Always respect the market's message. I put a tweet out this morning looking at some key stock movements from this day. I mean, you had Boeing down 17%. Things were just absolutely destroyed. And clearly the market was trying to tell you something. And I think investors have to remember that moving forward. Also, understand this. In times of extreme stress like we saw at this point last year, the Fed will hop in. And Miles, I know you remember March 15th, the Fed came out, cut rates to zero. Jerome Powell had a press conference. This stuff was really unprecedented in many respects. Yeah, you can point back to the Great Recession, but a lot of things that we haven't seen in a while. And then last but not least, too, a reminder for me, call your parents more and hashtag hyperfocus your life. There's more important things.
And, Sazi, it's interesting that you mentioned the market's message as well, because that clip we played from our colleague Ines Ferre, who was still down on the floor at that time. They didn't close the floor, I don't think, until the end of the following week, maybe. And remember, that was only March 11th was less than 2 weeks from what ended up being the market bottom. But, Ines mentioned that traders on the floor at that time were looking for fiscal relief already. The market knew sort of what had to be done to keep everything together. And I think that, I can remember myself having a tremendous lack of clarity on what I was supposed to do as a person, how I was supposed to handle it. And I did not really handle that period well at all. And I think that kind of market message scared me more than anything else. But as you note, the market was able to have a fairly clear head about where things were headed. And I remember that Powell call. That was a Sunday night press conference. There was guidance sent out to folks on the Fed distribution list, maybe a half hour before, that there would be an announcement and then a call. And this was, so that March 15th, that Sunday, I think would have been the fourth straight Sunday in a row, if I'm remembering correctly, that futures went limit down as they opened, 6 p.m. Eastern time. And so it had already been the market event to that March 11th date. I mean, again, we were only a handful of trading sessions away from the market low. 2355 on the S&P was the low. So we're only 400 points away from what ended up being that low on the